Today, we are having a conversation about boundaries. This is, I think, one of the most misunderstood values that exists, right? Because we often think of it in such negative terms, and yet when done right, has the power to sustain us as human beings on such a deep level. You might be out there and you might be thinking, it's a little strange that you're doing a message on boundaries on Mother's Day. You might be out there and you might be thinking, that checks out. That totally makes sense, right? But here's the reality. If we're being honest, when it comes to our relationship with our mothers, or if you're a mother and it's your relationship with your children, or in general, when we think about our relationship with family, often these are the people and the relationships which most need some healthy boundaries. It doesn't discount the amazing gifts and the love that we've been given by these relationships, right? Like you think about a mother-child relationship, and in some sense, there was a point in time where these two beings were pretty much one, but then they split, and there's this sense of individuation. And so boundaries in this context that we're going to be talking about today are really just establishing your own personhood. And what I hope to do today is just give some permission for you to examine what this might look like in your life, and to have some freedom to explore this idea of boundaries, not as something negative, but as something life-giving and as a source of self-love. We tend to think of boundaries as a bad word. We think of it as love being withheld. We think of it as walls coming up. We think of it as armor. We think of it as the severing or the lack of connection. But what I hope to do today is to flip the script a little bit, so that really we start to see boundaries as a way of caring for ourselves and recognizing that when we deeply care for ourselves, we actually are more equipped to care for and love others. And so I believe there's something really spiritual here about this concept of boundaries, but for us to approach it from a spiritual perspective, I just want to start with 3 premises of this conversation. The first is that when it comes to boundaries, they are there to care for you, right? They're something that we enact as an act of self-care. And friends, you are worth caring for. You really are. And no one's going to care for you better than you. You're in the best position to care for yourself in this way. So that's the first premise. You're worth caring for. Second, when we care for ourselves in this way, we are protecting and preserving vital energies, soul energy. We might think of it as life force, right? The thing within us that allows us to be the best version of ourselves. When you set boundaries, you are protecting that. And those energies are so incredibly valuable. So that is the second premise. The third, and this might be the one that seems the most paradoxical, that boundaries are not the end of connection, but they're actually a pathway to true, honest connection. That's something that we'll really explore in just a little bit. But I want to back up, and I want to kind of explore, what do we think of usually when we think of boundaries? We think of kind of establishing space, boundaries as space. And we know there are situations in our life where we really need some space. Like if anyone's been on an airplane recently, that's one of those areas and those situations when you really want to establish your own space. A couple months ago, Olivia and I had the opportunity to travel to South America, and we have this life hack for airplane travel. See, I like the window seat. Olivia likes the aisle. And so what we figured out, we still want to sit next to each other, but we also want our respective favorite seats. So what we figured out is, hey, we're just going to I'll book a window, you book an aisle. And, it's very unlikely that someone's going to want to sit in between two people. Who wants the middle seat? Who's going to elect to have the middle seat? The problem with our life hack is that it rarely ever works. So when we flew to South America, over the 6 flights it took to get there and back, we didn't have one empty middle seat, right? We always had a seatmate. And when you have a seatmate that is a stranger, you are probably familiar with this. You play this really intense game, and it's really about getting and managing territory, which is the armrest, right? There's this ongoing strategic battle to get your space on the armrest, right? So you start, and maybe you have the back of the armrest, they have the front, and then they go to the bathroom, and then you take the whole thing, right? And then you need to kind of go check something on your phone, and then they've taken it, right? And then you got to kind of come back and slowly inch your way in, It's brutal, right? But it's about establishing a sense of personal space. This is what we often think of when we think about boundaries, or we might think about more social, emotional boundaries, right? Like sometimes we interact with people and we realize they might have a different concept of social boundaries than me, right? Like you go to a party and you're talking to a stranger, and within 5 minutes they're telling you about their hemorrhoids, and you're like, I didn't, sometimes small talk is good, right? Sometimes I don't want, Sorry about that one. Then we have boundaries that come in the form of expectations that we define in our lives, like our work-life boundaries, right? And there's usually two kinds of people who, even on nights and weekends, are available to their company, right? And they don't have any sense of boundaries. Or there's people, maybe you're this person, where the millisecond that your shift ends, right? 5.000 and 1 millisecond, you are like, I am totally done. I do not exist at all. Like, I am on my own time. And so these are the ways that we traditionally think about setting boundaries in life. But when it comes to the emotional component, the spiritual component, boundaries in our relationships, we often misunderstand boundaries because we purely think of them as walls, as this gate of which there's a sign that says no trespassing, right, around our hearts. Now, when it comes to no trespassing signs, sometimes they are there for our own safety and well-being. In the case of this video right here. Sometimes boundaries are for our own good, right? And we should observe the signs. I didn't mean to leave that on there so long. Oh my goodness. But today we are talking about sacred boundaries. And really, to have this conversation about sacred boundaries, I want to share something that came into my life fairly recently, and it came in the form of a definition from one of my therapists. And yes, you heard that correctly, one of my therapists. I have a team. And she said this. She said, boundaries are not walls. They're actually a definition of where you end and I begin. They're not walls. They're not there to distance myself from you. They're there to define. And I really explored this idea, and as I did, I came to find that it also stretches back to a Christian mystic named Henry Nouwen who spoke about this, and he frames it like this: boundaries are not a dividing line, but a defining one. They mark where I end and you begin, and that is the only real way connection can occur. Now, this immediately might sound strange to you, right? How is it that boundaries are the only way real connection can occur? This seems like a paradox. I want to just break it down in really simple terms. If I don't know where you end and I begin, right? And this may come in all different forms, right? Sometimes, and we're going to explore this more, but often this is emotionally, right? We don't know what emotions I'm responsible for, what emotions you're responsible for in the context of relationship. If I don't know where you end and I begin, then in some sense, I don't know who I am. And if I don't know who I am, then how can you hope to connect with me? Right? Even if I think I'm open, if I think of myself as someone where, I don't need any boundaries, right? I'm just open to everyone. But there probably is some need within yourself that you might be ignoring in that sense. And even if you think, I'm just letting everyone in, you're actually alone in a certain sense because you're not able to share some of your deepest truths. Therapist, author, and founder of the form of therapy known as compassionate inquiry. His name is Gabor Mate, and he has this amazing explanation of what happens and how this can really lead to codependency. He says when we're not seen for who we really are, we begin to shape ourselves into what we think the world wants to see. And that's the beginning of the false self, the root of codependency. How many of us have shown up in this way, right? Not only does society always demand us to be a certain thing, and we have this conception of what the world wants to see from us, but it's very likely that we might have grown up in a family or in a family dynamic in which we felt the need to show up in a particular way. This in no way means that we didn't necessarily have a loving family or loving people around us. This is just something that naturally happens as part of becoming a human being. And we develop this notion that in order to be safe, in order to be loved, we need to present a certain way. For you, this might have looked like being happy all the time. You might have felt growing up like, well, people seem to like when I'm happy and they don't seem to know what to do if I'm not happy, so I'm just going to be happy all the time. Maybe you felt the need, maybe you still in your life feel the need to take care of everyone else around you before you take care of yourself. If I do that, then I'll be safe and then I'll be loved. Maybe you're the kind of person that you feel as though you need to be strong for everyone else. And that is how you are loved. And yet what happens when you focus on being what you think the world wants to see is that the real you is not seen. And so in many ways, our well-being in life becomes dependent on others validating what they want to see from us instead of us showing up as we truly are. I deal with this in the form of perfectionism. Any fellow perfectionists out there? Yeah. And it would be nice to stand up here and say, oh, I just like everything perfect because I have high standards. No. Perfectionism is often about thinking that if I can just control how everyone sees me, then I'll feel safe, then I'll feel loved, right? Which often shows up in the form of me coming up here, and if I deliver a message and walk away and feel like, okay, that was pretty good, then I feel safer, right? And if I don't know how it went, if I feel like, I don't know, then I feel anxiety, like I wasn't able to control how people saw me, right? This really can just cascade into a general sense of people pleasing, right? How many of us, you may have not raised your hand with perfectionists, but how many of us would say we're a people pleaser on some level? Yeah. And again, we think it's so noble. Oh, I just like to make people happy. No. People pleasing, if we're honest, is often trying to control how other people think about us, right? We want to make people happy so we feel safe and liked. The problem is, where we get stuck, where this can kind of get out of control, is that we forget, when all we do is try to control other people's perceptions of us, we forget that we are worthy of love just for being who we are, just for existing, beyond the performance. So when our inner well-being becomes wrapped up in all this performing what we think the world wants from us instead of who we truly are, that's when the boundary between who I am and who you are becomes murky. Right? Because I'm dependent. I've crossed over into needing you to do a certain thing and to making me feel okay within myself. And so this is where boundaries come in as a way of saying, I'm going to honor myself and however I need to show up. This, though, comes with a myriad of risks, right? Because you are risking disappointing someone. You are risking letting other people down. And yet sometimes, friends, we have needs. Right? As human beings, we can recognize needs that we have, and that need is going to just naturally let someone else down. Sometimes the need is to not be perfect, right? This is something that I need to work on for myself. As someone who struggles with perfectionism, I need to remember that I need to be able to give myself permission to not be perfect, right? Which is always, but just actually accepting it within myself. And when we can do that, sometimes we're having to risk or even know for sure that we're going to disappoint someone. We're going to let someone else down. And yet, when you show up this way, you are saying that you are worthy of doing that. You are worthy of advocating for yourself, of giving yourself what you need. And at the same time, you're not hurting or depriving the other person. You're actually giving them the opportunity to grow and to learn something. There was something really profound that happened in my life. Someone, a teacher, someone very wise told me once that when you say yes to something that was actually a no in your heart, right? And we've all done this, right? We've all had this deep no in our heart, and yet we say yes because we don't want to disappoint someone. And she said, when you do this, you're actually depriving that person of a growth opportunity, a lesson that was perhaps meant for them, but because you didn't honor yourself, you are preventing them from growing in that way. I'll give you an example, right, of something that in a community of this size has certainly happened here. It happens all throughout our lives, but I know, just through various stories and interactions that I've had here, that I know that something, and interactions like this have happened here. And if you think I'm talking about you, I'm not talking about you, because many people have shared this exact type of story with me. So it's common here. But this might happen at a community like this, okay? You show up, right, and you may develop some kind of friendship or relationship with someone else in the community. And then at some point, that person might come to you and say, hey, I'm not able to participate in this relationship in the same way, right? That person might need to pull back. Or maybe that was you. Maybe you became friends and then you needed to pull back for some reason, right? This happens for a myriad of reasons. And frankly, the reasons themselves are not important. Because sometimes when we need to set a boundary, we get caught in explaining and trying to, give the best reasons. And really, what we're saying is that I need the reasons to validate this boundary versus, hey, I need to set it, and that's just my truth, right? And so without getting too caught up in the reasoning, we need to set boundaries. We perhaps need to pull back, and that is naturally going to cause disappointment for that other person, right? It's going to feel confusing and difficult. This is not just something that happens here in this community. It's something that happens all over our lives, right? And basically, it looks like this, and you've probably had this experience in some form or another. It looks like this. Your soul, right, however you might look at this, or maybe just your inner self, your higher self, your soul is speaking to you. It's nudging you. It's saying things like, this thing that you were once able to offer, this relationship, this connection, this gift, you're not able to offer it anymore, right? I can't offer this thing that I was able to offer yesterday. And we have these nudges, and yet sometimes we ignore them because we want to avoid the disappointment. We want to avoid letting someone else down. And yet when we ignore the nudgings of our soul, we are giving away this valuable energy and this valuable life force that we so desperately need. How many of us have said yes when in our heart it was a no? This could be to anything. And then when we showed up to that thing or when we participated in something in a particular way, it felt like we were dying inside, right? It felt like this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. This is sucking the life out of me. We've all done it. And so now more than ever, in a world that is already sucking that energy out of us constantly, right? We're surrounded by media and negativity and so much discord in our world, and it feels like we're already having to fight as hard as possible just to hold on to that sense of well-being, that sense of alignment within ourselves, right? Now more than ever, it feels like we need to do everything we can to protect, to preserve that vital energy, emotional energy, life force within us that we can so easily give away when we're not aligned with our deepest truth. Are you with me? Are you with me? We need this now more than ever. And Brene Brown, who we saw at the beginning, she reminds us that it's an act of self-love to do so. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. It's Mother's Day today, and you may have deep love for your mother, or you might be a mother and you might have deep love for your kids. And yet there is this way that we all get stuck when it comes to our closest relationships. We subconsciously believe that in order to love others, it means we can never disappoint them. It means we always need to love them on their terms, even when it's dishonest for us. It's not aligned with our deepest truth. And really what happens is we kind of fall under this false notion that I need to empty my cup for everyone else until I'm allowed to have my cup filled, rather than being conscious of filling my own cup, preserving my cup so that I can be the best version of myself for others. It's a simple yet profound shift. And yet, why is it so hard? Well, we live in a culture that doesn't do boundaries very well. And in many ways, I think it's because we actually just don't do individuality well. We don't tend to live in a world that understands that everyone has deep, unique emotional needs. We think we live in an individual world that everyone can kind of show up how they want, but in reality, we promote uniformity, right? You look on television, you look at the ads that we're marketed with, and in general, we're told that you need to look like this, you need to behave like this. This is what a traditional and a normal family looks like. And so in many ways, we are encouraged to fall in line and we lose our individuality. But the reality is that internally, emotionally, we all are unique and we all have a deep sense of individuality. I'll give you an example, right? Like we all perceive things very differently. Some of you, when I walked on stage, you saw these pants and you were like, go for it, Jake. Like, that's awesome. Others said, that's a choice, you know? And then another group of you said, I don't know if I can come back, okay? Like, when I was leaving the house today, Olivia said to me, referring to the pants, she said, here goes nothing. Let that be an example to you. We are all unique. We all perceive the world differently. And yet there are things we show up to, systems that demand for us not to be unique. Systems that actually subconsciously demand for us to dissolve our individuality. Religion is one, right? How many of us showed up to a religious community or space in which we were asked not to preserve, but to dissolve our sense of self and individuality? Work, right? Work is just produce, make money, and we don't respect who you are as an individual human being. And sometimes this even shows up in our closest relationships. We don't realize it. But even in our closest relationships, we're dissolving ourselves instead of empowering us to be the unique individuals that we are. And so when we do this bold act of reclaiming our individual needs, reclaiming our boundaries, it can feel challenging, it can feel confrontational, it might even, in some situations, to some people, feel like a betrayal. And yet, I find this work to be so essential, to be really an essential spiritual shift as humans and as we develop as a species. And this is a shift that's basically saying, look, you are worth it. You can love yourself. And even when you love yourself, risking disappointing others, they're going to be okay. Right? Like if I come up here and I'm dependent on you giving me a certain reaction to feel safe, right? To feel like I hit my perfectionism mark, then I am putting way too much responsibility on you to make me feel okay about myself. It's not your job. That's my job, right? And when we become responsible for ourselves and you allow others to be responsible for themselves, friends, there is a profound magic that starts to occur in our lives. Jake Woodard is a podcaster and a coach who describes it this way: taking responsibility for your own life is a beautiful act of self-respect. Letting others do the same is an act of respect for them. Right? So there's this big shift here where we recognize our individuality. We recognize and have space for the fact that, hey, my needs are going to be different than yours. And therefore, my boundaries are going to be different than yours. And what do? Well, the best we can, we try to make that space in our hearts for other people to have different needs than us. And for other people to even have different needs at different times, right? Because we are always changing. We're always evolving. We're fluid human beings, right? Some people, and let's just say in the context of relationship, friendship, etc., some people are going to want more than you. Some people are going to want less than what you're used to. Some people are going to have a very different nervous system than you, right? There are those of us who show up to a space like this, and we think about the lobby, for example, as this high energy. There's all these people. We're all saying hello. We're all, giving hugs. And yet there are some people for whom that is incredibly energizing to see people and to have all that joy and interaction. There are others for whom that's all a bit overwhelming, right? And that's due to a number of factors, and includes even just the very wiring of our nervous system. And yet all of that, any response and anywhere in between, it's all okay. And we do our best to make space for all these different ways of showing up. Friends, this community is built on connection and it's built on belonging, but I don't want to just have connection. I want to have conscious connection. In some sense, I want to encourage us to raise the bar so that we can add even more awareness to how we connect with each other, right? And it's not our fault. Again, we grew up and we are molded by the society that doesn't have a deep recognition for the individuality of all of us. But I just want to invite you to ask, as you have interactions, even in a space like this, even in this building, to ask yourself, hey, what if this person across from me, what if they're wired a little different than me? Right? What if they have different emotional needs than me? And how can I increase my awareness to make space for that? This isn't about ending connection. This is about evolving it. And so what I want to do is I just want to give a couple of thoughts about how we might incorporate this into interactions that we have here. And I use this place as a concrete, grounded example because this is where we practice and evolve our own understanding of how community is built, right? This is where it's happening, right? And so may we use this place as the breeding ground for love, growth, deeper awareness and consciousness that we can then go out into the world and incorporate into our entire lives. So here are just some ideas about how we might approach connection here. Before you even walk through these doors, right, I want to encourage you to check in with yourself. To start with checking in with yourself and say, hey, what am I able to give today, right? Going into a space where there's all kinds of people, what can I actually give? What life force, what vital energy do I need to protect? And what vital energy would it be joyful for me to give to others, right? And just be honest with yourself and clear with yourself about that. Then, as you go to interact with another person, right, perhaps before either of you open your mouths, maybe you can start to check in with yourself and just ask yourself, hey, what might they be able to give? Can I expand my awareness and just have perception to say, hey, what might this other person be able to offer today? Researcher Albert Mehrabian discovered through a study in 1967 that 93% of emotional communication is nonverbal. 93%. Right? So before we even open our mouths, we are giving all kinds of messages. May we just be perceptive, right? So that first thing, check in with yourself about what you're able to give and about what this person across from you might be able to give. Next, right, share. Feel free to share, create that space and say, hey, this is where I'm at today, and give them space to do the same. I'll give you an example. It might look like this. It might say, hey, I'm a hugger. I like to hug, and if that's something you're open to, that's something that I can offer. But if that, no pressure, right? If that's not where you're at, that's okay. Obviously, you're going to say that in your own words, right? It's a bit of a long-winded way to do it, but you understand it's sharing where you're at, giving them space to share. By that same token, you might have already checked in with yourself, and you might realize, hey, I don't have that capacity today, and you could say, hey, good to see you. I just don't have the emotional energy for a hug today, right? It sounds so counter to what we're used to, and yet if you really think about it, we're just basically being honest about where we're at, what's going on in our hearts, right? So even right now as you hear that and you go, I don't know if I could do that, just think about how honest that is. Right? So that's the second. First, check in with yourself. Second, share and create a space for them to share. And then third, and this is, I think, an essential one, let go of the desire and the need to be received a certain way, because that is in your ego. Your ego says, hey, I need everyone to like me, right? But on the deepest soul level, whether or not someone was able to offer something that you might have wanted, right? Whether you had to deny someone something or you were denied something, your soul, on the deepest soul level, is actually just happy to give them what they need. It's happy that they've found that within themselves. Parker J. Palmer is a theologian who reminds us that in the building of true community is not about forcing sameness, it is about honoring difference while remaining connected. So even if you have an interaction in which you're not able to give what you normally are, they're not able to give what you were expecting, and it leads someone to a place of disappointment, by honoring them, right? You can actually, as paradoxically as it sounds, remain connected because one person was honest and the other person was able to receive that fully. See, the thing that we get wrong, and we do this in every area of our lives, often in our closest relationships, what we get wrong about connection is we think connection is about whether or not certain things happen that in our minds define connection, right? So like, did I, have this type of interaction with someone? The reality of connection is it's about the level of understanding and honesty you are able to share with another person. And sometimes the most honest truth is a boundary. Sometimes the most honest thing you could do is set that boundary. Bell Hooks, the author, shares this: we build beloved community by being honest with one another, not by pleasing one another. Friends, boundaries are generally not, or sacred boundaries really, are not about keeping people out. Yes, there are times in our lives where we do need to protect ourselves from people. But really, the idea of sacred boundaries is about letting people in to your truth and how you need to show up in a particular situation. Yes, it might be difficult for them, but this is how beloved community is built. Think about just your life for a second. How many of you have been on a spiritual journey? You've watched yourself evolve. You've watched yourself grow in awareness and consciousness. And there are people in your life with whom you just don't connect with in the same way that you used to, right? As you've grown, as you become more yourself, there are just ways that you can and can't offer yourself in certain relationships, right? And yet, there's a deep connection that remains by being honest, by sharing that truth. Friends, our vitality, our well-being, our deep alignment with our souls happens when we live from a place of truth, and that requires the courage to say no when it's a no in our hearts, right? It requires the courage to redefine our boundaries. And that can get so tricky because as human beings who are always changing, who are always evolving, who are not static, but we're fluid, our definitions of self, our boundaries are going to continue to evolve. And so may we remain open, not only to the changing boundaries of others, but to the changing boundaries of ourselves. Because the shadow side of boundaries is when boundaries are used as an excuse not to change, when boundaries show up and protect us from the truth that we are always changing. Alan Watts said, "You're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago." Now, for some of you, this is a little tricky, right? And there are some limitations to this. Like, if I can't, we're what, 25 minutes into this message, and if I said, look, from here on out, I'm no longer Jake, okay? My name is Ian. I'm Ian the Australian. And henceforth, I will be known as Ian. I started this message as Jake, but now I'm Ian. I'm just going to keep going on this bit until everyone's laughing. Right? That would be weird. And you would probably say you need to add another therapist to your team, okay? But there is a reality in which this is actually very deep and true, because you might wake up tomorrow and in some minor way or major way, you might not be able to give yourself in a way that you were able to yesterday. Or maybe you're able to give more of yourself than you were able to yesterday. And you can't just get stuck holding yourself to the person you were yesterday or the person you were 5 minutes ago, because that is fighting the reality that we are always evolving. We are always changing, right? If you're like me and you've gone through some kind of major faith shift, and that led to you having to really kind of let people in your community know, hey, I'm different than you might have thought. I'm going through some things. I'm understanding reality in a different way. And this relationship that we've established in a certain way, hey, I have to redefine who I am. And that can be risky. That can be difficult. But to truly love others and to truly love ourselves, we need to be spacious enough to allow those changes, to allow those evolving boundaries. There are probably many of us who had a child or who had a family member come out to us, right? And in that moment, we had the choice to either redefine our understanding. It's okay. And scene. If you're out there and you've had someone come out to you, right, you were given this choice to either say, I'm going to hold you to who you were 5 minutes ago or who I thought you were 5 minutes ago or yesterday, or can I remain open as you need to redefine the boundaries in your own life? Right? This happens to us all the time. This happened to me. I had a friendship that, with just very recently, I perceived it being a certain way. I thought it looked a certain way. And then that friendship, they needed to establish new boundaries. They needed to evolve and change and pull back in a certain way. And at first there was some confusion for me. I was thinking like, oh, that was just very unexpected and there's some disappointment. But at a certain point I realized, right, this is all about creating that space for other people to show up as they need to, right? And they're responsible for themselves and I'm responsible for me. I can't hold them to making me feel a certain way. Friends, we're on this planet and we've been given this beautiful gift of life to be our unique selves. And the only way we're going to know who that unique self is if we're comfortable creating these boundaries, defining who we are in relationship to other people, right? And today we haven't even begun talking about how this applies in our work life, or how this applies when it comes to religious spaces, or how this applies in committed relationships. But we've started this conversation by simply saying, hey, it is an incredibly courageous act to start to think of boundaries as an act of self-love. And so I want to encourage you, if you're comfortable, just to close your eyes for a minute. We're kind of just do a little bit of a centering prayer, a meditation. And as you close your eyes, as you feel yourself relaxed in your seat, just imagine that beyond the body, right, on a deep soul level, when it comes to our consciousness, right, the fact that really we all come from the same source. And on that level, we are all interconnected deeply. But we are here on this planet with the beautiful gift of these human bodies that can feel and experience life and experience unique perspectives. And yet part of these human bodies is that we exist in a state of unconsciousness, that often from unconsciousness we hurt each other. And we do so unintentionally. In many situations. But this is where that courage to have boundaries comes in. This courage to love ourselves. This courage to know when it's time to protect and preserve our vital energies and our life force, so that we can continue to grow and we can continue to heal and we can continue to be a beneficial presence in this world. So just for a moment, sit with that feeling of knowing that you are worth caring for and that you are responsible to care for yourself. And one of the ways that you do that is by knowing when to define your needs, what you can give and what you can't, how you can show up and how you can't. And knowing and trusting that even when you need to do something that may lead to someone else feeling let down, that they're going to be okay, that they're being held, that they are on a journey and they have their own process and they will be taken care of. And that as you deepen in your understanding of self-love, you are showing others how to do the same.